If mom ever protested against his behavior, dad would start yelling at her relentlessly, berating her until she would succumb to crying. I vividly remember the times he would throw her food on the floor or in her face, screaming at her about how she couldn't cook like his mom. He would complain about how dirty the house was and accuse her of not being good enough for him. He would drag her out of the house and threaten to throw her on the streets while she would scream for help. We lived in one of those neighborhoods where other people would see everything going on but would keep their noses out of others' business since they didn't want to interfere between a man and his wife. But even if they would have called the police, I doubt our mother would have filed a complaint against our dad since she didn't have anywhere to go and was so used to being treated like that. I never really understood why my dad was so harsh on her, since my mom really did her best as much as she could with what she had. She worked as a part-time server as well as took care of me and my twin full-time. All her paychecks went to our dad since he refused to let her have her own bank account, as he wanted to take care of the finances around the house. Dad did nothing to help us around the house except terrorize us. Just because he paid for our rent and amenities, he would constantly remind us about how we lived under his roof, so we had to listen to him, otherwise he would kick us out to the streets. As a child, I felt paralyzed and didn't know how to react to his explosive outbursts. However, as I grew older, I began to find my voice and the courage to stand up to him. I would ask mom to retreat to her bedroom before dad came home drunk, so she could be away from his wrath. I would then take on the task of serving dad his dinner myself. If he ever threw the plate of food away in anger without eating, I would refuse to serve him again, no matter how much he yelled at me. When he threw things at me in his fits of anger, I would deliberately refuse to clean and leave the mess on the floor, so the next time he walked through the house barefoot, he would accidentally step on the debris and injure himself. I thought, with time, he would become stronger and better. However, when George and I became teenagers, I started to notice slowly that he began behaving a bit more like dad, especially around girls our age. He would make derogatory comments to our female classmates, saying things like they shouldn't waste their time and study, and that they belonged in the kitchen. These comments would irritate me, but I tried to chalk it up to him trying to be funny, so he could fit in and be well liked by our classmates. I also noticed that people generally invited me to parties and would later invite George only if I reminded them. I guess George noticed this too and thought being funny and saying sarcastic remarks would make him look better. Unfortunately, his comments started to grow increasingly sexist. One time, at a birthday party, he called one of my female friends a fat kitten and told her that no one would ever marry her if she stayed fat, and that guys would just sleep with her and leave her. He tried to laugh it off after the comment as if it wasn't a big deal, while my friend had tears in her eyes. I felt so terrible for her that I mumbled an apology and dragged my brother out of the party. I was furious and yelled at him for being such an embarrassment in front of everyone. George argued back while laughing, saying I shouldn't get so worked up over a joke and that he was just pointing out the obvious. I told him, firstly, that it was rude and that he had no right to say such mean things to anyone, especially on their birthdays. But he insisted he was just being funny. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "No one laughed at your comment, so who did you think you were being funny for?" He grew quiet as I went on to tell him that it was pathetic of him to put down women, especially since that was exactly what our dad did to our mom every day. In my anger, I spat out to him how much I hated him for being so similar to our dad. I knew I had crossed the line because he glared at me with a smirk. He replied, "Well, maybe I don't mind being like dad. At least he knows how to keep women in line." His tone was dripping with defiance, as if he didn't see any issue with his behavior, making my blood boil. His words infuriated me, showing just how much he didn't grasp the damage he was causing by acting this way. Later, when we reached home, since I refused to take him back to the party, Mom sensed something was wrong from my sullen expression and asked if we were okay. I didn't hesitate to tell her the truth because I couldn't understand how George could behave this way. Even Mom agreed with me that George had crossed the line and reprimanded him immediately, telling him to never speak to a woman like that again. He just scoffed and told her to mind her own business and go back to the kitchen. It was shocking to see my brother act this way. I was so pissed that if my mom hadn't held me back, I would have punched my brother right then and there. It was the first time I felt nothing but disappointment for him, the same feeling I felt whenever I looked at Dad. I wish I could say that George grew out of this phase over the years, but unfortunately, he never did. I think this is why he and I started to grow apart and were no longer close friends. I couldn't understand his hatred towards women for no reason and didn't want to be around his toxicity. I stopped including him with my friends and their parties, and everyone else immediately dropped him too. I guess this must have pissed him off even more, to realize just how much people didn't actually value his friendship. During this time, our parents' marriage was still deteriorating. One day, I remember I came home to a sight that is forever etched in my memory. My mom's uncle had passed away, and she had gone to attend his funeral. Since George and I had exams, we couldn't go with her, and Dad was never one to accompany Mom anywhere, so she had gone there alone. After finishing my exam, I headed straight home to study, while George probably had something to do because he wasn't home when I arrived.